Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. So from time to time on this channel I'm planning to do very short, spoiler-free reviews of books that I've recently read to help you get an idea of whether it's something that you're going to want to read too. So I've got the first one of those for you today, and it is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Now, John Boyne is best known for his book The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which is a children's book set during the Second World War about Auschwitz concentration camp. So that's a very heartbreaking and beautiful book. It's also been made into a film, which is very powerful. And so we know from that John Boyne likes to tackle difficult topics, and this book is no different. So I will say that if you go into it thinking it's going to be like The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, it is in terms of the nature of the story, but this is definitely a book for adults. I'll get on to a bit more about that in a minute. So the synopsis for this book is it was inspired by the 2015 marriage equality referendum in Ireland, which allowed gay people to marry for the first time in that country. It is their own voices, so John Boyne is gay, and he's very open about that, and he's also Irish, and so for him it was the chance to explore this idea of gay rights, and he does that through the character of Cyril, who was born in 1945 in the book, and it follows Cyril throughout his life. So Cyril was born in 1945 to an unmarried mother and is shortly afterwards given up for adoption. And then the rest of the book follows Cyril's life over the next 70 years as attitudes towards homosexuality change, both in Ireland and abroad. The story is about Cyril's life, Cyril's loves, the mistakes that he makes, and ultimately his search to find his identity, to find family, and to find happiness. So it is a really powerful book, and I really enjoyed reading it, but there were a few little warnings that go with it. As I say, it's definitely a book for adults. It's got a lot of adult content. It's quite a lot of swearing, and also quite a lot of homophobic language, which is challenged throughout the novel, but if that is something that would upset you, then you may not want to read this one. There's graphic violence, there are situations of neglect of children and also child abuse. Also, in terms of adult content, there is some sexual content, both gay and straight sexual content. So if any of that stuff doesn't appeal to you, then maybe don't read this book. I was reading this for Tome Topple, and you may have seen me tweet about it, because the blurb on the back really does not cover what the story is actually about. It mentions Cyril's adoptive parents, but leaves it at that, whereas there is so much more to this book, and it just really made me sad that it felt like the publishers felt the need to trick people into reading it, because there's no mention of the fact that it's about gay rights at all, or about a gay man's search for his identity, and his search for acceptance, and I found that a little bit disappointing, because it wouldn't have put me off reading it if I'd have known that, and also I would have appreciated a warning for the violence in the novel. And I kind of joke with my friends sometimes that books should have the same sort of labelling as DVDs that say, you know, language, sex, violence, other, and then you could go into a book knowing what it would contain. As I say, I don't think it would have put me off reading this book, because it was recommended. I saw someone recommend it on BookTube, I can't remember who, and so I was really intrigued and wanted to know the story, and particularly the first couple of chapters really drew me in, and so I wanted to know how it turned out, and I put up with a lot if I'm hooked with a book. So once I start a book, there's very little and I get into it, there's very little that will put me off reading it. So just a word about the structure. This book is split into 10 sections, and they fall 7 years apart. So the first section covers the events leading up to Cyril's birth. His mother, as they say, is unmarried. She's kicked out of her family home and moves to Dublin. And so it covers the events up to Cyril's birth, and then the next section is when Cyril is 7 years old, he's been adopted, and then the following section is when he's 14, and so on until the final section, which I think is when he's 70. This was really good in terms of covering the whole of his life without missing out any of the sort of really important events, but it was also a bit frustrating particularly because the first section was really gripping and ended quite abruptly, and I really wanted to know what happened, particularly to Cyril's mother, but then she doesn't really feature very much through the rest of the story. Also, in terms of some of the other sections, they also often finished on quite abrupt, quite serious events, and then the start of the next section would be 7 years later, and he'd be setting the scene of the new section, and you'd have to wait to find out what happened in the in-between time, which got a little bit frustrating. I also found that I really enjoyed, as I say, the first section, found that really engaging, and then the next couple of sections I really didn't enjoy very much. I didn't find Cyril that likeable in those sections. I found them to be a bit more slow paced, and some of the events that happened to be just quite frustrating, and it was only sort of towards the middle of the book where Cyril starts to really accept his identity and move on from his past that the book really picked up again and became really compelling again throughout the second half of the book. Cyril was a very likeable central character, even though he screws up a lot and he's a bit of a jerk sometimes. I still ultimately was rooting for him even when he was making quite questionable life choices, and that just shows the power of John Boyne as a writer to make someone making such big mistakes into someone really quite likeable. Some of the other main characters were a lot less likeable, so Cyril's adoptive parents, Maud and Charles Avery, didn't really like them. They weren't that interested in the fact that they had a child, and essentially were quite neglectful of Cyril. The other major character that features is Cyril's best friend and you could say first love, Julian, and he is a real jerk and I did not like him at all. There were some other characters that I really liked that I wished had featured more, and one of them was Cyril's mother, Catherine. She was a really enjoyable character, but as I say, after the first section she's sort of quite minor. She doesn't feature very much because Cyril doesn't know her, doesn't know his relationship to her. And then the other character that I really enjoyed was Julian's sister Alice, who again could have played a bigger role, I felt. In summary, I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads. I think if we were allowed half stars on Goodreads, it probably would have been 3.5 stars, because of, as I say, some of the content that I found a bit problematic. I enjoyed it enough to be generous to give it that extra half a star. It's quite brutal, it's quite heartbreaking in places, but it's beautifully written and ultimately quite a redemptive story. It's a really powerful story and really important. For me, it was quite eye-opening. I found the section about the AIDS outbreak to be particularly moving and really quite powerful. So I'd say this is a very important book and I do recommend it, but with the warnings that I said earlier about some of the content that may not be for everyone. That's all for today, so thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you've read this book, what you thought of it, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!